Hello, America. Welcome to your Leo Nation, where we believe in and support the rule of law. I am the chief, the happily retired chief, Mark Garrett. And speaking of rule of law and chiefs, we have a great one who supports the rule of law on today. And that is Chief Scott Hughes of the Hamilton Township in Ohio. Chief, welcome to your Leo Nation.
Hey, Mark, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great. We were just having some fun before we went on air here, talking to Anthony Jackson out there in California. He's complaining with his beanie on about how cold it is. And of course, you just kind of laughed yourself to death about you don't know what cold is. I live in Ohio, right? So, although, by the way, Chief, we had snow here in the panhandle of Florida last week. I got about 6 or 7 inches here.
Wow.
So,
wow. And you guys down there, you don't have the infrastructure to handle that. So it shuts you all down. For sure.
Well, you know what? We have Ron DeSantis, so we're happy about that. He seems to fix most problems. But yeah, you know what? To be fair, we did shut down for like 2 full days here. Everything.
Yeah. It just been another day up in some parts of this country.
Yeah, exactly. Wouldn't even notice it in Ohio, I guess.
Yeah.
But you know what? Listen, it is a pleasure to have you on. We had a great conversation last week over the phone. I got to know you, and you got to know me, but you still came on anyway. So thanks. But I'm reading your resume. I'm reading all of your accomplishments, your writings, watching videos, and I asked you last week when we talked. I said, "How do you? You're all over the place." Let me just give a little bit of the background, very very short. I mean, you're chief. I said Hamilton Township. You were the academy commander. You're a certified instructor, Ohio Peace Officers Training Commission, certified law enforcement executive. You are certified the expert witness, and on and on and on. But the amount of training videos and writings and lectures that you have done and continue to do, in addition to being chief of police, I don't know how you do it.
Well, you left out father and husband.
God, I forget. Don't tell your wife. She'll probably come kill me.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you, Mark, first of all, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me on. People, I've been asked before about this, about all the things that I do. And, law enforcement, ever since I was a kid, this has been a passion of mine, is to be a police officer. In fact, my mother, who is in her late 70s, would tell you that there's a photograph of me when I was probably 2 or 3 years old, back when you used to go to Kmart to have your portraits taken. So for your young listeners, they're gonna have to Google a Kmart, but you would have to go to a Kmart to get photos. And she took me there, and I had this little badge clipped to the collar of my t-shirt. And she said, "Scott, take the badge off to get your photograph taken." And apparently I threw an absolute fit inside this Kmart that I was not going to take that badge off. So there's a picture of me, again, 2 or 3 years old, with this badge on my shirt that I refused to take off. And I guess that was when I knew I was going to be a cop. My father was a United States Marine who had served in Vietnam as a combat veteran. My father passed away when I was 22. He died at the age of 49 from cancer from his exposure to Agent Orange over there. Anyhow, I tell you that quick story to tell you that I really think this is in my blood. So when you ask, how do you have so much time to do this? It's because it's all I've known. It's all I've known since I was a 3-year-old at Kmart, and it's all I know now into my 27th year, I guess, total. I absolutely love this profession. I will defend this profession and support this profession and the men and women who are out there doing this job. I have a friend of mine, his name's Bob Meter. He and I teach together. He has a saying that this is the hardest job in America, and I completely concur. And as a leader, we're leading people doing the hardest job in America, and they deserve everything we have. So that's why I do what I do, sir.
Well, it's well said, and there's a lot of truth in that if you're doing what you love, you're not working, and it's just the activity that brings you joy and meaning, and you're certainly doing that. You touched on some interesting things, and in the time that we have, and I know you're busy. I know you just came right out of a meeting to be on with us. I really appreciate that. So I want to make sure we cram some important things in here. Again, we're talking to Chief Scott Hughes. One of the things you talk about when you're a couple years old and you have that badge on and you don't want to take it off, and that's kind of when you knew you wanted to, be in this profession the rest of your life, as a juxtaposed to someone like myself, who literally I put an application in for the Highway Patrol on a whim. That's kind of interesting. Let's give it a shot. And you end up being a chief of a law enforcement agency. Ended up being a division commander for the Highway Patrol, a 2-star chief. And we ended up in similar places in life, but kind of different paths. I don't want to talk about my path, but what I want to talk about is going right to the academy where this all starts. And in other words, you can have a very diverse type of group in the academy. People come from all types of backgrounds, experiences, by the way, impressions of law enforcement. But the job of the academy and agencies is to turn out a consistent, professional product. And I know you've been obviously and still are a big part of that, but especially being an academy commander. So I would like for you to discuss your perspective and experience as far as being an academy commander in other words, the ingress and the egress of these applicants and trainees.
Yeah, so sure. So in Ohio, I don't know that all states are like this, but in Ohio, you can essentially put yourself through an academy. Typically, these are done at a vocational school or at a community college, and there's dozens of these scattered throughout Ohio. So while I was an academy commander, unfortunately, because I don't have the time, I don't get to experience that anymore. But what I did a lot of and still do is a lot of teaching in the academy. And academies, in my opinion, are by design to just teach you the fundamentals, right? I equate law enforcement training to building a house. Academies are designed to pour the foundation. Academies are not designed to put the walls up, to put the roof up, to put the shingles on the roof, and to enclose the structure. They're designed to give you 6, 7, 800 hours worth of foundational training. Where I think the training really begins, and where I feel like we really, for a lack of better words, fail our people, is when they get hired at the agencies. Now, some of your listeners are going to be like, what's he talking about? We have the most robust training academy. There are certainly going to be the exceptions to the rule, right? I travel the country teaching, as you already alluded to. I've talked with tens of thousands of police officers over the last 12 years traveling the country. I can tell you, in my experience, in my professional opinion, we have a lot of police officers who come out of the academy and then their training begins to fail them. A lot of what we teach them in the academy, they don't retain. Again, we're shoving 700, 800 hours worth of stuff down these recruits' throats. We're giving them a 100 question multiple choice test at the end. And if they pass it, boom, congratulations, you're now certified to become a police officer. And then we expect our agencies to put them with good field training officers who are going to then help put those walls up and begin to put that roof up. And in my opinion, that's really what we're failing. Whether it's through just we're not selecting the right FTOs, we're only picking them because they've got a certain amount of time on the job. I've seen cases where we've put people on as field training officers who are within their last couple, 3, 5 years of the job. And because they get a pay bump to train somebody, then they want to be an FTO because they're trying to bump up that retirement. And in today's world, we got to be very cautious as leaders of individuals who match that description, right? We need to have our best people in our organizations training this next generation of cops. To do otherwise, in my opinion, is setting us up for failure down the road. So while academies do what they can, they're only there by design. They're only there to again, just teach you the basics, pour the foundation, and then let your agencies really teach you how to, quote, be a cop, if that makes sense.
It makes great sense. And in my experience, we have the same challenges with the Highway Patrol. I mean, generally, ironically, and there were some agencies, the Highway Patrol right now being one of them, there's a big hiring wave right now. And the CHP has been very successful about keeping the academy very busy, which is great on one hand, but the challenge to that is that you have this large influx of brand new officers graduating the academy and going out in the field, and you only have a certain number of good FTOs. And we can talk about what good means, and I think you've done a good job with that, at least articulating that there are challenges to having the right FTOs. So in other words, often we have, for lack of a better description, we have trainees training trainees often. We have very, very young, very new, unseasoned officers just because of the influx. Now, I don't know if that's a challenge in your agency or really more importantly in the broad scheme, if you've come across that with other agencies, because you teach, you talk about this. Have you seen that, Scott? Have you seen that where agencies are overloaded with trainees since they don't have enough FTOs? And the other thing is, you're talking about, people wanting to get a pay bump, and so they become an FTO, or, things like this. How do we go about in the profession of really encouraging people who we think are leaders and good decision makers to become FTOs?
When I used to teach FTOs on how to FTO, I used to always say good cops, good trainers. Bad cops, always bad trainers, right? Good cops can be good trainers, but a bad cop's never going to be a good trainer. So I think agencies have to recognize, first off, that not everybody's meant to do that. And you're putting someone in a car with another officer for 3, 6 months, depending upon how the agency's set up. At a minimum, they're going to be with somebody for a few weeks to teach them the lay of the land, et cetera. I think agencies have to develop folks before they want to put in for a specialized assignment, right? In other words, if you want to be an FTO, then I need to send you to FTO school before I put a recruit in your car. I need to, if you want to be a supervisor one day, I need to send you to a first line supervisor school before you get promoted to supervisor. I think there are some people out there that are doing it really, really well, in my opinion, where they're investing in their people early. There's some folks out there that have this philosophy that you don't have to have rank to be a leader, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think some of the best leaders in this job don't have chevrons on their sleeves or wear fancy brass on their collar. So I think that's one of the steps, is finding those folks, identifying those individuals. You have to I believe you have to incentivize it. You have to show someone who's going to train somebody that you're going to be compensated for that, whether it's additional money or time off down the road, et cetera, or you're going to struggle getting anybody to want to do it. With that being said, you do bring up a valid point. I don't see this in my agency, but I have seen this across the country, and that is not only too many recruits coming out, but the FTO fatigue. Most cops don't like anybody in the car with them, right? Just ask them. So,
By the way, I was one of them. I had 40 trainees over my tenure as an FTO, but
yeah.
I was like riding alone whenever I could.
It's always funny when you get a community member who wants to ride along, like, you'll hear a sergeant say, "Hey, there's someone here from the community who wants to ride along," and it's like, phew, everybody takes off, right? And whoever was the last one out the door got him. But listen, I think there are certainly attributes that you need to look for in a training officer to build upon those concepts that started in the academy. They got to be a good communicator. I tell you, I've seen a lot of FTOs fail because it doesn't have to be your way to be the right way. Recruits are going to go about it a different way. But, Mark, we could talk about FTOs for an hour, and I know we're on a time crunch, but agencies know who these people are. Who are those unofficial leaders? In my opinion, those are going to be the ones who are going to be your good FTOs, because if they're an unofficial leader now, I always say this too, FTOs are just like sergeants. Sergeants might be responsible for a group of people, but an FTO is responsible for one person. So who are those people in your department that you can see down the road being a good supervisor? I think that's where your FTOs are.
Yeah, it's a very important point that it's all agencies are busy. They all have conflicting priorities, and unexpected things happen, whether it's a day or a week or a year that gets you off the course that you had envisioned. These things happen in every agency. But I don't know if there's anything more important than identifying those leaders you're talking about, Scott. I really don't know if there's anything important to build that next generation properly. And in other words, you have to sit down often. When you identify those leaders, those good cops who are leaders, I think a huge part of what supervisors and managers have to do is really take time to have conversations with those would-be field training officers. Say, listen, we need for you to do this as much as we need for you to go out there and do good police work every day by yourself. We need for you to help us to build the next generation. So I think, if anybody listening out there in a position of a decision maker, really take that to heart. What you said, identify those people, really kind of groom them, encourage them to sacrifice their freedom in that black and white and go out there and groom the next people. You kind of moving on, kind of in a chronological aspect here, going from being a trainee to a rookie cop, let's say that first, really kind of couple of years, I think, you call people rookies, depending on what agency you are. I think the Highway Patrol might have been longer than that, but it's just, it's so different than when you and I started. The bottom line, we all hear that all the time. It's so different and with so many ways. But what are some of the things that as a leader in law enforcement and as a chief of police and law enforcement, what are some of the things, some of the tools that you utilize and you recommend to other leaders when it comes to really grooming these new cops when they're on their own to become better, productive, professional law enforcement professionals?
You have to invest in them like you invest in your own kids. You have to make training a priority. It's going to be so easy to have an excuse. And I don't mean that derogatory, but it's very easy to say, oh, I don't have the budget, or oh, there's not enough people working, or oh, I can't make it work with the schedule. Listen, these men and women are doing the hardest job in America, as we've already discussed. You can read the studies, you can read the reports that have been out in recent years. Cops want to know that their departments care about them. How do you show them that you care about them? You invest in them. How do you invest in them? You give them training. Cops love going to training. And I don't mean a webinar or some online platform. That's not what I'm talking about. They want to go to a class where they're actually going to learn something. There's been a shift ever since 2020 to put everything online. While there's certainly a time and a place for some of these webinars, don't get me wrong, I should preface it. There are probably some classes you can take. But when you're talking about safety and survival, those can't be taken online. I would even argue leadership. I want to be in a room. I want to interact with folks when I'm talking about leadership. I want to have interaction with other people in the classroom. This job is dangerous, right? And we're very quick as a profession to have these quick knee-jerk reactions to whatever the quick buzzword is. A couple years ago, the buzzword was implicit bias. So every state in America was throwing implicit bias training down our cops' throats. De-escalation, that was another big buzzword that was shoved down our throats. And listen, I'm not discrediting that. What I'm suggesting is you have to find the balance. Officers need to be comfortable with their weapon system. They need to be comfortable with handcuffs. They need to be comfortable with ground fighting. You mentioned in my introduction, one of the things that I do on the side is I serve as an expert witness, defending cops in a lot of use of force cases, police procedure cases, things like that. And one of the issues that's almost always brought up is their training. And I've sat in depositions where attorneys have pulled out a piece of paper, and it'll say, well, on this date, it shows that he was certified in de-escalation. He took a 4-hour webinar. Well, do you think a 4-hour webinar really taught him how to de-escalate a situation at 3 o'clock in the morning when he's being charged at with a knife and he's running around, he's falling on the ground, it's snowing? Insert scenario, right? Putting them through training that's actually going to benefit them do wonders in the long run. If you're a small agency and you don't have the budget, collaborate with neighboring departments. Find a way to make it work. But you as the chief, if you got these on your collar or you're a decision maker, you have to make it a priority. Mm-hmm. If you don't make it a priority, then it's not going to become a priority. And then it'll be the next thing that'll happen. One area that I'm very proud of here that we do, and look, I'm your typical suburban department, 35,000 residents. We sit just outside of a large city. My department fits the description of many departments out there. But we shoot 4 times a year. We're on the ground fighting of some sort 4 times a year, and we're one of the safest communities you could want to live in, mm-hmm. which mm-hmm. is great. But we know too that criminals don't know boundaries, right? Criminals don't know jurisdictional limits. So we want our men and women to be prepared, and it starts with me as the leader investing in them.
You touched on the practical training, the hands-on training. And it's not just I'm an old dude and I grew up with that, but I think it just makes so much sense that, look, if nothing else, let's just talk about muscle memory. just muscle memory. If nothing else, and there's a whole lot more to talk about that when it comes to the advantages of practical, physical, in-person training, but just about muscle memory. And that takes me to an article I read. I think it was on LinkedIn. I mean, it's where I found it. Really about training like the pros, about the comparison you make. It's a great article. And Anthony, I think we should link to that. I'll get it to you on the website. But you compare the training that elite athletes go through compared to law enforcement. But, we expect perfection from law enforcement officers, but they don't get anywhere near the same type of training and rapidity of training that athletes do. Now, look, I want to be totally, obviously, practical about this and honest about it, that it's virtually impossible for law enforcement officers to get the quantity and repetition that athletes do. Number one, it's because athletes play a game once a week or whatever it is. So in the middle, they can have all this time for training. Officers have to go out every single day or we can't get our job done. So, however, it doesn't mean that we can't do more in that realm, either supplement the online training or maybe we reduce the online training and we get more of the practical. And again, people can read the article for themselves, but I would like for you to talk a little bit about that because I think it's very important.
Well, yeah, you bring up a great point that, we admit we can't train like an athlete because the athlete plays one game a month, or excuse me, one game a week. Baseball players, a little bit more than that. But with that being said, look at the standard we hold a baseball player to than a law enforcement officer. I think I used this example in my article. I can't remember, but if a major league outfielder misses a routine fly ball, it's replayed over and over and over, and he is criticized and he is dragged through the mud because it's a routine fly ball. I always say that is athletes are trained to never make an error. So when they make an error, it's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe he or she did that. My goodness, it's just a fly ball. Now, all that training that they've had, hours and hours. I read a statistic that a Major League Baseball player, the average player shows up to a baseball game 4 to 6 hours before the game starts. They do multiple sessions in the batting cage. They watch film, they eat, they practice fundamentals. That's 4 to 5 hours before a game starts. We got police officers who are showing up to the job and there's calls stacked and they get in their car and they take off and they just go, right? So while yes, because our jobs are different, we can't train like them, then we have to look at the standard that we're holding them to. Police officers are human, right? Today's training is going to be on implicit bias. Tomorrow's training is going to be on search and seizure. The next day's training is going to be about driving, right? We don't do that. We give them 8 hours once a year of firearms training, right? The average cop in America, look at the studies, look at the surveys. Average cop in America shoots his gun one time a year. Here in Ohio, by law, you only have to fire your gun once a year and you only fire 25 rounds. And let me tell you, it is low drag. I mean, it is not hard to do. Yet they're going to be expected to go out here in the middle of the night under low light conditions, stress through the roof, physiological changes like they've never experienced, and they're going to be expected in some places to make the right call every single time, yet we're giving them zero training to prepare them for that moment. But don't let a cop make an error because watch what happens to them.
Yeah, look, I got to say right now a couple of things here, and as you can tell while you're talking, I'm making notes because you keep bringing up these points that I think are so important. I'm going to go back to this, but the officer involved shooting, scenario you bring up, they're only required to shoot once a year, 25 rounds, and by the way, even in California, it's quite a bit higher than that. So that shocked me. So wait, that's just not enough. It's just not enough.
Oh, you can research that offline. There's a lot more. They're doing a lot less.
Yeah, but yeah, that's frightening. It really is frightening. And for the reason we talked about earlier about muscle memory, about preparing yourself for that, and to the best of the ability, of an agency or a trained officer, firearms, use of force, being able to put the officer under as much stress as possible in a training scenario. It's just not the art of the mechanics of firing the gun, but it's under stress. It's with obstacles. It's with unknowns, popping up. So the point is, can we make the time that we do have for training more effective? Can we make it more realistic? And we talked about this offline also earlier about a former colleague of mine from the Highway Patrol, Gordon Graham, and about realistic training, something he implemented with the Highway Patrol over 30 years ago. And, it makes a difference. One thing you mentioned, Scott, and you don't have to listen. I know you're chief of police, so you don't have to reply to this with any opinion. But I'm going to tell you right now, for my listeners, because they know my mentality, the implicit bias training, I think it's crap. I think it's BS, and I think that it puts. And again, I don't know your position. This is totally organic what I'm saying. I think that we place these things in the minds of officers. In other words, we kind of set themselves up for failure because implicit training implies, obviously, I know it's redundant, that there is bias. Now, we all have bias, by the way. All of us have bias. We're all human beings. So we're all kind of a product of our environment, our experiences. But when we take time from officers and train them on implicit bias, whatever that means, we're taking time away from them that I think could be used for more practical, more effective, and more objective training. And again, that's just an editorial, so you don't have to respond. If you want to, you can. That's just my take on it. And this is coming from someone who grew up in Southeast Los Angeles during the Watts riots and been stopped probably because, of my race time to time, things like this. So I get it. These things happen. But my God, I know that you and all of the other law enforcement agencies do the best they can to weed out people who may bring inappropriate views and positions into law enforcement. How effective is this training? How much is it needed? Not much as far as I'm concerned. So,
Yeah, I mean, I use that as an example because that was a hot topic, right? And I think to that point, I would replace that training with communication skills or some sort of a high risk encounter scenario training where I think you're really going to get a better gauge on how an officer is going to respond under stress. Because as you look at some of these quote unquote high profile cases, and we talk about this in our classes, the overwhelming majority of these cases involve officers experiencing a sudden onset of acute stress. And it's the sudden onset of acute stress that affects the decision making. It's not that they went out there on purpose to do something bad. It's they weren't prepared to deal with that stress at that moment. And then they just reacted. And Chuck Grimsbury in 1980, he was one of the original authors of Street Survival, said, under stress in a crisis, you instinctively revert back to the way you've been trained
yes,
or haven't been trained,
that's right.
right? So if you're not prepared to deal with that moment when it happens, then you're just hoping like some magical something occurs and poof, you're going to make the right decision. And then if it's the wrong decision, well, then you're in trouble, you're indicted, you're in prison, you're this, you're that. Yeah, we haven't given them anything to prepare them for that moment, but they sat through a 3-hour webinar. They should have known better. And that's not fair to the cops.
It's not fair to the cops. And giving obviously the wrong training or training that isn't necessary or training that makes the officers feel, geez, maybe there's something is wrong with me. Maybe my subconscious is making me do things based on, immutable characteristics of a suspect, things like this. I tell you right now, again, my audience knows I get really hot under the collar about that because I know that law enforcement does a great job of, and there are bad people out there, of keeping those people out of law enforcement. It's not perfect. And the very limited time and resources that law enforcement agencies have should be used for things that are practical, that are verifiable, and that will help save officers' lives and will help keep the high professional standards in law enforcement. We're winding down here, but before we leave, Chief Scott Hughes, we're talking with today. Want to get a little bit about your perspective and experience with the mental health aspect for officers, and I know you're big on that. I'm glad about that. I'd like to hear a little bit about that from you.
So in 2021, our safe community here in southwestern Ohio, we experienced a double officer involved shooting. It was a justified shooting. Two of my officers responded with domestic. They were met with gunfire and they had to shoot and kill an individual. 3 months later, our community suffered a tragedy when a little girl who happens to be right here, when Emery Wood wandered away from her home on a Sunday afternoon and tragically drowned in a retention pond. So while for some of your listeners, that's just another day on the job, for a community like us, 34,000 residents, impacted us. We knew we needed to do something for our people. Long story short, we have since then basically partnered up with a first responder wellness group, if you will. And we have a contract with a couple folks who deal in nothing but first responders and military primarily. Our officers are encouraged to, in fact, they're mandated quarterly. Excuse me, in 2025, they'll be mandated quarterly. 2024, I think it was twice a year, but irregardless, they have to go have a conversation.
No, by the way, this is all officers, not just ones that were involved in traumatic.
Even me, we all have to go. We have to sit down and we have to talk. Now, you can go in that room and say nothing, and nobody's going to judge you, or you can go in that room and talk for 4 hours. What I'll tell you is, while I don't know the conversations that occur, obviously, what I can tell you is that I have officers still from 2021 who still go and talk to these folks. And it's not because there's anything wrong with them. It's just because they have an outlet, right? They have a voice. Body's going through something. When I teach supervision classes, I remind supervisors that all of your people are going through something, and you have to constantly remember that. The other thing that I'm proud of that we do here that a lot of agencies don't do. Two things I want to share with you, Mark, and I know you got to go, but
I'll let you know we're good.
One of them is that I let my officers work out on duty every single day. I think that's imperative. We have a nice gym, a CrossFit gym in the basement. They're encouraged to work out on duty. We have some common sense restrictions built in to keep them from hopefully getting hurt, but I let them work out on duty every day. That's number two. The third thing that we did here, this is our second year doing this, is we have a physical therapist on site weekly, free of charge. That physical therapist is here to do what you would expect a physical therapist to do. Hey, my hips are tight. Hey, my lower back hurts. Hey, my shoulder's jacked up. Whether it's stretching, it's dry needling, it's exercises to do. I'm very proud of that. I had an officer, he was here for 3 or 4 weeks. He was playing basketball off duty and he blew his ACL. I got him back to work 2 months early than what was expected because of the aggressive physical therapy that we had. Now, I tell you that because I'm very proud of the men and women who work here. I'm very proud of the culture we have. Does that mean we don't have problems? Of course not. We're going to have our issues. But like I told someone not too long ago, if our people are happy 90% of the time, then that's good, right? I'll take 10% that, hey, things aren't going okay. Like, I'm proud of that. And my message to anybody who will listen is those are the types of things that you do for your people that show them that you care about them. Now, do they all go see the physical therapist? No. Do I? Yes, because I'm old and my shoulders are broke. But it's an opportunity that's out there for our folks. And I think when you talk about mental wellness and mental well-being, don't forget the physical side as well, right? And I'm sure you've had guests on your podcast before that have talked about the correlation between physical fitness and mental fitness. I know as a chief that if I have officers out here working third shift, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, they start to get tired. They come in here, they walk or run that treadmill for 20, 30, 45 minutes. They're going to walk back out and they're going to be better decision makers. They're going to be less likely to wreck their cruiser. They're going to be less likely to generate citizens' complaints because they're not tired. Decision-making skills are so important, especially late at night. Again, it kind of goes back to what I started with, right? Like, take care of your people. Remember where you came from as a leader. Your people, again, they're not going to be happy 100% of the time, but they're going to come to work being a lot better than their neighbors, their departments, because that's one thing cops do is cops talk. And word gets out fast when you find an agency that actually cares about their people versus some that don't care as much.
Well, I can say this, take care of your people is a phrase that unfortunately it's almost a throwaway phrase. Oh, take care of your people, take care of your people. It is so refreshing to hear someone bring the receipts. Mark, here's what we do. Physical therapists, mental professionals, the gymnasium, all of these things. These are practical, real, tangible, ongoing examples of your concern for your people. It's one thing to talk about it.
And listen, it's not. Look, these. I wish all these ideas came from right here, right? But I think it's your job as a leader to see what's going on out there. I have a phenomenal department, from my rookie all the way to my assistant chief. I'm proud of every single one of the people that work here. Again, does that mean we get along all the time? Of course not, right? But I'm extremely proud of them, and they come to me with ideas. And I feel like as a leader, one of your jobs is, if someone comes to you with an idea and it makes sense, well then let's try to find a way to say yes. Too many administrators, in my opinion, they're just so quick to say no. Why don't you let your people work out on duty? What if they get hurt? It's a workers' comp claim. Okay, I mean that's why you pay into workers' comp. What if they go out here and get in a foot pursuit and they drop dead of a heart attack? Right? But if I can let them go run on a treadmill for 20 or 30 minutes and reduce that chance of cardiovascular disease, then I feel like that's a better investment. But again, it starts here, right? It starts with you wanting to make the difference and getting the right culture and the morale and all those things. Yeah, once your people know you care about them, they'll do anything for you.
100%. 100%. We've been talking with Chief Scott Hughes, Hamilton Township, Ohio. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I wish we had more time. We'll probably have you back. And by the way, hopefully I can get my butt up there to Ohio, maybe go for a ride along and hang out with your copper stud one day. It would bring me a lot of pleasure.
April and leave by September.
Don't worry. Yeah, I'm not good in the cold. And by the way, before we leave, Chief, where can people find you? Where can other leaders like yourself find you? And maybe you can actually help them become better at what they do.
Well, certainly, and that's the thing, and I appreciate you asking. Don't do anything alone, right? If you need help, if you need guidance, if you need a mentor, there's people out there willing to help. So you can find me on LinkedIn at my name, obviously Scott Hughes. I also have a landing page at objectivelyreasonable.com, expert witness. So objectivelyreasonable.com, and click on the expert witness tab, and you can find me there.
Fantastic. Chief Scott Hughes, God bless you, my friend. You're doing a fantastic job, and I hope people take the lead from what you're doing and implement these policies and mindset across the country. We will see you again, and thank you so much for your time, buddy.
Thank you, sir.